Hello and welcome to the HRD Live Podcast, live from lockdown, where I am thrilled to be joined by none other than Chuck Heaton, returning champion. How are you doing, Chuck?
I'm doing very well, Michael. How are you?
Not too bad, thank you. Getting on with it as we all are. First things first, then, I thought I'd like to just ask what you've seen so far of businesses responding to COVID and the lockdown process and what we've been going through, where we're at now, and what are some general thoughts of yours about how you've seen businesses respond, how you've responded, and what the positives are, maybe what some of the negatives are as well?
Yeah, Michael, we have seen a wide variety of responses that companies have put into place to respond to the pandemic. You know, a lot of businesses obviously went into shutdown mode because a lot of countries required people to shelter in place, basically. And so companies that weren't deemed essential had to figure out how to have people work remotely. So that has been obviously the huge trend that has occurred, and companies literally scrambling in some ways to utilize their IT systems, to have a robust enough infrastructure to facilitate, people being able to collaborate and get work done. And in a lot of ways, surprisingly to some critics of remote working, it's been a fairly big success. Companies have learned how to adapt. People have learned how to adapt to utilizing Zoom. Obviously, is a huge program people are using, but Microsoft Teams, Slack is a big program that people are using. So you're seeing a lot of flexibility and adaptability within people. And then obviously there's been essential companies, manufacturers, energy producers that have had to keep people in place. So they have had to adapt the workplace to protect people from the virus. So from a standpoint of temperature checks when people arrive at work every day, the requirement of wearing masks, the plexiglass shields. If you now go into a grocery store or a department store, everybody is separated by plexiglass. And then you see sanitation. I mean, a ton of hand sanitizers, literally people wearing gloves in a lot of places. The way that the flow of people through an office or through a plant, one-way aisleways, one-way stairways, elevators that either only can have 2 or 3 people on it or are converted to be touchless because of the thought of if you touch certain surfaces, you might could get the virus. And then just cleaning, literally used to be, you saw cleaning occur at night or when people weren't in the facility. But now, part of the company routine is having regular cleaning of everything. And part of that is to obviously be preventative against the virus, but part of it is to let employees know that the company is doing everything they can to protect them from the virus. And then obviously companies having to adapt policies and procedures to deal with active or potential cases of the virus. And I think you're now starting to see there's an evolution of testing. So testing is becoming more available. It's becoming more widespread. And I think, especially as you're seeing sports come back, in the U.S. with the potential of baseball, soccer, basketball, big discussion here in the U.S. about the NBA coming back in a enclosed facility. So Disney World, Wide World of Sports, they're going to keep all the teams, all the people, and no fans. So, and they're going to have to do regular testing. So, a sport that I love very much, college football, has started bringing their players back on campus, and that's a prelude to bringing students back on campus. But what they're doing is they're testing every player as they come on campus, and if they find positives, they're isolating them, and that is happening. Literally, multiple colleges have reported 2, 3, 4, 5 players have tested positive, all asymptomatic, so not outwardly showing of the virus. So I think what sports is showing us is going to be what workplaces are going to adapt to as we continue to not have a vaccine and the requirement of the workplace, to keep people safe. I mean, the core responsibility, and usually when you think safety, you normally just think, in a manufacturing plant or, that kind of safety. But but literally, workplaces have a risk potential now with the virus. So it changes the vernacular and the responsibility of companies on a much higher scale.
Mm-hmm. There's so much to unpack there. But one thing, there are a few things you mentioned there that are really interesting. And even when you talk about sports games without fans and the way that we'll walk around offices and so on, there is a social element to this after this that will be so different, right? The way that people working together will interact with one another, and that it can be really challenging, the way that changes. I mean, it's challenging regardless, but then having these additional strange functions and parameters you have to work within, that can really change the way it works. As HR leaders, how do you think this kind of strange social landscape can be managed, or how can employees be helped through it, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, this type of working is testing the relationships that employers and managers have with employees. So, we've talked before about trust. So how employers trust employees to get things done now that people are not physically sitting in facilities and not physically interacting with their managers or other employees. And so it's part of that is, testing the relationships that employers have with their people. And as we've talked about a little bit earlier, it's being successful. You're seeing more productivity. You're seeing people able and willing to work longer because they're not commuting, and they're not spending half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour each way commuting. So now they're getting up, having breakfast, and then they're on their computer. So it's, you're seeing some positives from this, but there are definite downsides as well, or challenges, as we may say, because of the outside pressures, whether it's a working mother with kids that are now at home because there's no school, or, multi-generational families that are having to live together in a certain space. We were talking earlier, Wi-Fi challenges. I mean, literally the Wi-Fi infrastructure is being tested to a level that we've not seen. And I know you and I both have literally been on, video calls where it just dropped. I mean, literally just, went dead. So, but then there's also now new terms. Zoom fatigue is now the new topic. And I mean, when you're on camera all the time, used to in old style conference calls, you're on the phone. So a lot of people multitasked or did other things while they were half listening to the subject. But if you're on camera the whole time, you're visible and you're kind of required to pay attention. So, and it also changes the conversation, right? It changes how conversations happen because of, there's a delay, right? I mean, there is a little bit of you have to listen a little more.
Go on. Yep.
No, you go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's, I mean, and then, culture, right? I mean, I think a lot of times companies in some ways took culture for granted, and, ever more than, I mean, we talk about empathy and EQ and, a leader's ability to, I mean, it's a scary time, right? I mean, the threat of the pandemic and the impact it has on yourself, your family, especially if you have older relatives who are at higher risk or have high risk conditions. And then the social issues that are going on as well. I mean, it's just a perfect storm, as they would say, of multiple issues that employers are having to confront on a rapid pace. And so it's really stretching the limits of companies, and their ability to address these things all at the same time.
Of course. I mean, and one of the key things there you mentioned around culture, there's a sense of unity and support, I suppose, in that as well. And one of the things that clearly is at risk during a time like this is mental health of employees and of leaders. Businesses generally, in times of great pressure like this, when all of the things that we took for granted, like culture, are suddenly in question or at risk, that can put an extra strain on everybody. How would you recommend that HR leaders, business leaders, whoever, approach this new and more difficult landscape, perhaps of mental health, and try to support their teams?
Yeah, I think companies really have to take a look at what's their current status around mental health. What are the benefits that they provide, through their benefits program? What kind of training do you provide to managers to be aware of, triggers or potential warning signs of people's mental health and being challenged? And so companies have to have a more robust strategy. They have to make sure that that it's not just recently in the U.S. we just had Mental Awareness Month in May, and it's been that way since the 40s. But this year in particular, the campaign had "Break the Stigma" was the tagline of it, and I think for a long time in our culture, it wasn't popular or wasn't accepted to say you had a mental health issue. And I think just in the last year or so, you've seen big insurance carriers, Cigna, for example, in the U.S., has had a huge campaign about, mental health as part of your overall wellness. And you've seen other companies address and accept that mental health is a part of a wellness strategy. And so I think HR folks have to really look at, what is their company's philosophy? What is their approach around mental health? How much training can you provide, to your managers and supervisors, people on the front lines that are dealing with their employees on a regular basis, and especially now where there's such an attack on your mental health. I mean, just the rapid amount of change occurring, the outside environmental conditions that are happening. So I think companies really have to revisit their overall wellness strategy, but two, in particular, the emphasis that they put on mental health. And there's a lot of tools and levers you can utilize. I mean, one is a lot of companies have a EAP or employee assistance program, a carrier that provides that kind of service. And a lot of times, companies will provide a number of free visits for employees, making sure people know about it, know it's available, managers pushing it or advertising that it is available and that they support it, and then also trying to create a safe space for people to raise those issues and help employees through it. I think that goes a long way in just generally helping people, and also your culture of awareness and acceptance. And, I think companies really have to put an emphasis on that, especially now with how separated you've become with remote working and, just the issues that are confronting people every day around the pandemic, the economics, and the social, all at the same time. And it's a global issue. It's not a U.S. issue. It's not a U.K. issue. It's everywhere.
Absolutely. So there's obviously a huge task there in terms of the current stage of the lockdown we're at. But the next thing, of course, is the return to work, whatever that's going to look like, whatever that means. Even, I mean, it means something different, I think, depending on who you are, where you are. I mean, I assume there are as many different meanings for the return to work as there are people who are returning to work. Right? It's so complex. But what's your outlook at the moment, Chuck, on what that might look like? It's hard to say, of course, across the globe. But how do you think, as HR leaders, it should be approached, this return to whatever the new normal, as they say, will look like?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, certain. One size does not fit all. I mean, it depends on what scope your company is involved with, how much remote work can you support. I think, you've seen obviously the big tech companies, which are usually the leaders in this space, Google, Facebook, Twitter, have all said, hey, you're going to have people permanently working from home from now on. Now, we'll keep this space available for you to collaborate, but there's going to be a different way of working and different rules involved with what's going on. So it's really changing the trend of how you bring people back to work. I mean, I've heard of companies, here in the local area they have a red team and a blue team. 1 week, the red team comes in and the blue team works at home. The next week, the blue team comes in and the red team works from home. So, all recruiting now is going to be done remotely. It's all going to be done via video conference or Zoom. There's a couple of universities that I work with, and they're putting in place policies that career fairs, which were a huge event in the fall. Employers come on campus, they meet with people, they do interviews. All that's going to be done virtually this fall. So, and all interviews are going to be done virtually. So it's really changing the dynamics, because usually, people count on that human interaction, right? That impression you get of people talking to them face to face, and the emotions and facial expressions and, et cetera. So it's really changing the dynamics of how talent attraction and retention are going to work, at least for the next 12 to 18 months.
Of course, that emotional element is so important as well, I think. And it's one thing, again, how do you maintain that in a time like this? How do you maintain that connectivity with people? It's something I think that you really miss out, even if it's something like, when everyone goes for a drink at the end of the week or something like that, that's when that's gone. Everyone can get together on Zoom, but it's just not the same. I think we've all had the Zoom drinks and things like that, but it's never going to quite feel the same. But I suppose, there will be some return to emotional connectivity, of course. And, it's HR's role, I suppose, to try and engender that. But we'll have to end fairly soon, which is disappointing, of course. But one thing I know that's really important to you, that's important to me, that we've discussed a lot before, is music. And you and I are both kind of obsessive, I think, when it comes to music. But what I'd like to know is, I think, speaking to all the business leaders, listening to this, watching this, are there any recommendations you might have for things you can listen to that might get you through, or anything of that ilk?
I think, everybody's a little different, obviously. As you and I have talked about, our music tastes are interesting, but it's been interesting to see. Believe it or not, there is an age difference between us. There's a generational difference, but it's interesting to see, we have a lot of commonality when it comes to music taste.
Of course.
At least appreciation of that. And I think in a lot of ways, music's one of those topics that brings people together. And
absolutely.
Great conversations and debates about who's the best and the impact it's had on your life. But we know music, we know statistically, that music has an impact on people's emotions and feelings. Companies use music to influence, things. So, I know, in previous companies I worked for, if you're at a big meeting, typically they use music as an intro to a particular speaker. If you go to a baseball game, every player has a certain music snippet that they use that identifies with that person. So, for me, there's certain music that just sings to my soul. I'm originally from the state of Alabama. So Sweet Home Alabama by Leonard Skinner literally brings goosebumps to me when I hear it or talk about it. And that type of music that brings back memories. And we were talking earlier that, Spotify has seen a huge increase in nostalgic music. So classic rock, 70s and 80s, rock and roll, because people have gone to, their comfort music, so to speak. We all eat comfort food, but we also listen to comfort music. So the music that either reminds you of a better time or a better place, or brings back memories, pleasant memories, so to speak, you go to. So, I think, upbeat songs, I think of Eye of the Tiger, from the 80s, Survivor, or Renegade by Styx has always been a song that gets you going.
Very good, yeah.
I Can't Get No Satisfaction by the Stones.
It's a favorite of mine. I love that one. Yeah.
That just kind of gets your day going. Woom, woom, woom. So it's music can be a powerful force, and it's also a connection point with people. And as we look for ways to connect with people, and as we see these windows, into our souls a little bit, with video conferencing into people's homes, it's a way to connect. So music can be a powerful way to connect with people, to share your interests and ideals in some ways. So, I could talk forever about music. So, it's because it's had a huge impact on my life. And I think it's it's a fun thing to talk about, but it's also a tool to use to help people cope.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that's a perfect note to end on. Thank you so much. I think anyone who hasn't heard any of the songs you recommended, I say go ahead, listen to those. But remember, at a time where we need that connectivity, I think what better thing to do it than music. Thank you so much, Chuck, for joining me on the podcast. I really appreciate it, and looking forward to having you on yet again very soon.
Sounds great, Michael. Thank you for the opportunity.